A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Catherine Titch. I am the moderator for this wonderful session on Nexus Cash, Efficiency in Anticipatory Action and Social Protection, one of the humanitarian talks here at the European Humanitarian Forum. We do have some very basic housekeeping. As you know, there's only one exit to run out of this session, so we hope you don't do that while we are talking. But we also are live streaming, so when we have a Q&A session in the middle of the session, I will go around and we will distribute microphones, so please that you use the microphones, because otherwise it's difficult to understand each other. I would like to also welcome the online audience that hopefully is able to see us right now. We will also have one of our panelists actually calling in from Vietnam, so we hope the connection will work. Well, without any further ado, let me just briefly introduce our distinguished panelists, and then I will hand over to you as well. We have our colleague from the Dutch government, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Mariette Schoerman, who is actually the director of the Department for Stabilization and Humanitarian Aid at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's a pleasure that you're here. Ms. Schoerman has been and is currently responsible for the department's 4 divisions at the ministry, and that actually encompasses peace building, rule of law, stability and security, migration and humanitarian affairs. She has also worked previously as the human rights ambassador of the ministry and coordinated the Dutch membership of the UN Security Council. And she has also worked as a NATO's special representative for women, peace and security, and also as a Dutch ambassador to the Republic of North Macedonia. That's a very long bio. I think it's even longer, but very warm welcome, Ms. Groman. Thank you so much for being here. We then have also Mr. Tran Ding Deng. He's the head of Applied Climate Division. Sorry, he's the National Humanitarian and Emergency Affairs Director for World Vision in Vietnam. And he works on disaster risk reduction and emergency response. And he also works, or worked before, with CEDA on community-based projects, healthcare system strengthening for disadvantaged communities in Vietnam. He has also a very long experience with many other organizations, but we're really grateful he's here from Vietnam. Then we have, and sorry, I jumped here before, we have Mr. Tran Ding Trong, the head of Applied Climate Division, Institute of Meteorology, Hydrology, Climate Change, IMHEN. Thank you. I hope you can hear us, Mr. Trong. Okay, he's probably right now muted, but we can see you. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much. So he is very experienced in implementing projects on forecast-based financing, obviously providing the scientific evidence when it comes to climate changes, trends, pattern in weather. And he has led with many organizations, including the FAO and INGOs in Vietnam, working out on the impact assessment of climate extremes and providing that data to the relevant organizations and actors. We also have, to come back to the live in-person panel, Mrs. Ha from CARE International. She has worked for many years on the aspects of gender and inclusion, and she also has been a very active participant in this project that we will present to you today. She's highly experienced around the issues of protection, gender parity, and engagement of community-based action in Vietnam and beyond. So thank you so much for being with us today, Ms. Ha. And finally, last but not least, we have Mr. Massimo La Rosa. He's the policy advisor for forest displacement and social protection and the Nexus, which is a huge portfolio, I guess, at the European Commission, DG ECHO. And he will give us the closing remarks and also point us to some new and updated, very important guidance documents from ECHO on some of those related topics. So thank you so much for being here today. And we will hopefully just learn a bit about the project, but also I would like to invite you to share if anyone in the audience has experiences or thoughts on other similar projects that look at anticipatory action and Nexus Cash or social protection. Well, let's get started. This project is actually about how communities can be mobilized to engage in humanitarian action and build their own resilience through longer-term financial assistance that they can invest and reinvest in preparatory measures to be better prepared for any shock that may happen. So in this context, this project was really focused on forecast-based activities and assistance. Basically, there was a trigger that was agreed between all the different entities and the government of Vietnam to provide cash transfers before an identified impending disaster risk would hit particular communes. The project benefited about 6,500 households in Vietnam in 4 communes, and it's about to close. So we have some learnings, live learnings from this project, and we will hear a bit more about how the different components and the different stakeholders were required to actually step out of the comfort zone and try something new. And also the question was, do we say we do not regret that we have transferred the cash, even maybe if the impact did not happen or did not happen to the expected extent? So it's a very interesting discussion around this. I will now hand over to Ms. Kurman to give us some opening remarks on this topic, and I hope that we will have a very enjoying discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here to discuss on basically so many important issues linked together in one. Let's say cash nexus, but an anticipatory action, climate change and social protection. But it's really very topical, and I think very topical for the whole humanitarian forum, which the central theme is like, how on earth are we ever going to meet the rising needs, the needs that rise because of climate change, because of conflict, because still of the economic impact that we had from COVID and the lockdowns. So we see a doubling or a tripling in needs, and the humanitarian system will never be able to cover those, even less than in 2016 when the report Too Important to Fail of the high-level panels was issued. So it's not, the whole Nexus discussion is really also like, what can we do better collectively, not only from the humanitarian side, but also from the conflict prevention side and from the sustainable development side, in order to address the root causes. And as I see in my team, because well, you gave the bio, you said tell my position. My colleagues always joke that I'm Madam Nexus. Because the way the Dutch system works is indeed we get all those themes in one department. But what we try to do collectively from our different policy divisions is really to have resilience, and resilience of those left furthest behind at heart at whatever we do, each from their own mandate and their own portfolio. But it is in the end on how do we boost and foster the resilience of the men, women, boys and girls in the most difficult and fragile contexts. That is our common purpose. So both from the humanitarian side and from the peacekeeping, peace building, conflict prevention side, as well as from the migration and sustainable development approaches to forced migration and long-term migration, displacement, we have this shared purpose. So really, I think putting resilience at heart is what the Nexus approach is about. As I said, each from their own respective mandates and options and possibilities. So I really would like at the kickoff here to stress the need to enable people and communities affected by crisis to deal with those crises in a dignified way and self-affirmative way, building on the resilience that they have and that they're day by day demonstrating that they have. So in a way that builds their resilience, that fosters their resilience and their ability to act, to anticipate, and to recover in whatever stage of a crisis they are. So that people-centered approach focused on the resilience of the most fragile people in the most fragile context is at the heart of what we do. And I think in that sort of triple nexus approach, cash is really a crucial way, I think, to not only be more effective in delivering aid, but also delivering that support to boost that resilience in a more dignified way. So it allows people and families and communities to not only alleviate their needs, but also to anticipate crises and indeed to prevent a future increase in those needs. So I think in order to do that effectively and efficiently, we need a lot of learning across the different pillars where we are. And I think the program, the project, the activity that you're going to discuss today is a very good example of how that can work and how cash can really effectively, as almost a highway, I think, to foster resilience and agency of people in fragile context, you know, to basically provide them with the purchasing power to make their own choices and to anticipate. So cash is a very, very powerful instrument. And in my experience, we continue to approach that instrument in a very stovepipe manner. So it's important to have a triple approach to the use of cash and what it can do, not only to alleviate immediate needs, but also to allow to anticipate and to recover. One of the things I would like to highlight is the coordination, the importance of cash coordination. I think the previous eminent person of the Grand Bargain, our Minister Sigrid Kaag, who by the way deals with cash these days, she's now the Minister of Finance. But she said that cash coordination was the Achilles heel of the humanitarian response, of the humanitarian system. And in the Grand Bargain, there is a special caucus working on cash coordination, which actually resulted in a cash coordination model, which was adopted last year by the IESC. And it sounds very technical, but these kind of very technical models are needed basically for us to deliver better and to deliver on our promise to foster really local resilience. So I hope that these kind of practical solutions will also be at the heart of the discussion that you're going to have today. What can we learn? How do we overcome the different stovepipes, and how do we make sure that together, you know, we use the most effective and efficient way to really boost the resilience of those left further behind? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate. Well, with this very big background that is very helpful and gives us the different pivots of what we're actually finding in the Nexus, I would like to hand over to Mr. Trong from IMHAN. As we said, IMHAN is the Meteorological Institute, part of the government in Vietnam, and he has, with his team, provided data and input and guidance on how to develop which triggers for particular weather phenomena that will cause drought or flood. So we do have some questions to Mr. Trong, and maybe we can just show him on the screen because he's calling in live from Vietnam. Yeah, wonderful. Hello. We have some questions around what was the role of IMHAN? Oh, sorry. Do we have him live as well?
I am very happy to talk to you about.
Yeah, that is the recording. I think that's the recording. Excuse me for that faux pas. Mr. Trong, are you there? Okay, if the connection has not gone, let's just play this pre-recorded session, please. Pierre? Let's just play this pre-recorded video from the start. Let's just play this video, this slide.
From 2006 to 2012, we use MM5 model. Good morning to all of you. My name is Trần Đình Trọng. I am working for Vietnam Institute of Meteorology, Hydrology and Climate Change. I am very happy to talk to you about IMHAN weather forecasting ability and cooperation with NGO in forecast-based financing. Let me start with IMHAN weather forecasting ability. In Vietnam, IMHAN is one of the key organizations in weather forecast. We often use numerical model to forecast the weather, heavy rainfall, and tropical cyclone. From 2006 to 2012, we use MM5 model. From 2013 to now, we use WAP model to predict this kind of weather. IMHAN forecast and issue climate bulletin in which the climate condition of the last 3 months is summarized, and for the next 3 months, seasonal climate forecast is predicted. The variable used is temperature, rainfall, extreme event. The extreme event, including maximum and minimum temperature, heavy rainfall, tropical cyclone track, or tropical cyclone intensity. IMHAM have a system for drought forecasting and warning by using satellite information and using model for current drought condition and for the drought warning. We also forecast monsoon in terms of onset date and withdrawal date, as well as the intensity of the monsoon. Let's move to cooperation in forecasting based financing between IMHAM and NGO. We have a close relationship with German RC and VNRC for heatwave trigger. In this project, we build a trigger for the 12 big cities in the whole country. Another project we work with GRC and VNRC is building trigger for wind and rainfall in tropical cyclone. In this project, we build the trigger for the middle of Vietnam in both rainfall and wind intensity. We cooperation with consortium including CARE, World Vision and Plan in FBEA project, in which we build trigger for and forecast drought and flood for 2 targeted provinces in the middle of Vietnam. Another important NGO that we cooperation in FBF is FAO. FAO and Swiss RC support us to study and build drought trigger for Cà Mau province in the south of Vietnam and for Gia Lai province in the highland of Vietnam. We also provide the drought prediction for the whole country to FAO and VNDMA. In this, we provide the product and upload it in the website of VNDMA for controlling the drought in the whole country. Let's move to the question and answer section. What are the role of IMHAM in AA? IMHAM is forecasting warning of natural disaster with detailed user plate, as well as the lead time to meet early action requirements. Lead time often from 2 to 5 days in advance. We determine the intensity of natural disaster by area. Analyze disaster risk, the raw map for each type of disaster for the whole country or for the region. Research and build trigger threshold for different types of natural disaster based on its impact. From the scientific evidence provided by IMHAM, it is possible to classify disaster occurring by area and by time of the year. It is proved that it is possible to activate cash relief for each region, which affected by a type of disaster during a certain time of the year. For example, the certain region will be affected by storm and heavy rainfall induced by storm, concentrated from July to September. IMHAM also show that in the southern region and the certain highland will be affected by drought from November to April. The northern mountainous area is affected by cold front in the period from December to February. For AA implementing, there are the following challenges. Complex terrain condition and deeply spatial differentiation. In some regions, there are the areas which full of terrain type, hill, plain, cotton area. Lack of data and it is very difficult to collect. The hydrometeorological monitoring network is quite rare in Vietnam, especially in remote areas. The system of machinery for forecasting is limited. Many types of natural disasters occur throughout the country under many complex weather conditions such as Asian monsoon, dead wind, and so and layout, which leading to the difficulty in forecasting, like a mechanism and policy on AI. The last thing I would like to talk today is opportunity of impact. The government is increasingly interested in AI, and there are many national programs interested in IBF, where the forecast bulletins are tending to shift from predicting the accuracy of an event to IBF. Many international organizations are interested in AI. Local government, ministry, and sector increasingly understand the importance and necessity of AI, so they are ready to implement and accept this model. I would like to end my talk at here, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trong. And he can hear us, and he will be live, hopefully, when we do the Q&A. But thank you so much. So we've heard now a lot about the technological side of things for weather forecasting and for how to utilize this data in Vietnam. We'll come now to the community level and how is community engaging in this process. So I would like to ask Mr. Le Van Dong from World Vision Vietnam, which is one of the acting or working agencies in this project. How has the community experienced this project? What are the best practice insights from this project to better understand and build connections to leverage the engagement with the government and possibly transition some of the community engagement facilitation to the government completely and linking it to the government's social protection mechanism that is ongoing? How do we build system resilience, and how do we ensure that there is local actor leadership continuously and sustainability also in terms of financing and investment into this activity? Over to you, Mr. Van Dong. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So good morning. So I'm very pleased to share some perspective from the government, from the community side in this process. So we have heard a lot about anticipatory action, and somebody mentioned forecast-based financing. So sometimes people feel a little bit confused, but actually this is something we should come to consensus, is that it's more or less the same. So actually Vietnam, people from the government side and the community have been trying different ways to escape from the comfortable zone in terms of disaster risk management. And anticipatory action has been considered as one of innovative way to pilot the new idea, and especially for to build resilience for community, as well as to connect with social protection. Yes, and I would like to share some very quick reflection from implementation of this eco-funded project for the consortium of care plan and World Vision in Vietnam. The project is not very long, but we come up with some very quick ideas that the cash and voucher assistance is very timely and responsive to the needs of the community. The second thing is deployment of cash and voucher assistance is usually cost is lower than the in-kind or other modality. That's very important because many humanitarian agencies just think that we should come up with in-kind support, but actually cash is very more effective. And another very important lesson learned we come from the implementation of this project, as well as the AA initiative, is community people, when they get the cash and voucher assistance, they can flexibility to address their needs, especially in terms of increasing the preparedness capacity. And another important thing is also through the cash and voucher assistance, with the engaging financial service provider, the intervention can increase transparency and accountability, because we try to establish capitalism from the donor side and local authority and also the beneficiary. So, and last but not least, the cash and voucher assistance is very important to resume local markets as well as livelihood in the long run. So now I would like to share a short story from project. So can I have a photo on the screen? Okay. So in this photo, you can see it is a beneficiary from the eco-funded project on anticipatory action. So Ms. Dân, she is a set of 74. She's one of the poorest household in the south of Vietnam. And she has been at very high risk of drought. And she living alone, so her main income is mainly selling the Vietnamese noodle to the neighbors. So through engaging in the project implementation, she has been trained on how to prepare for drought. And with some cash assistance from the project, around 30 euro, she could improve her wash stockpiling, and at the same time she could also change her mind, because she says that earlier she didn't have pay much attention to water storage to respond to the drought, but with training and introduction from the project, she now stock more water for drought, and also she stock food, and also use some cash assistance to buy medicine for herself. And as in long run, she can also maintain her livelihood by selling noodle. Yes, and from this, we just want to escalate a little bit more about the linking between not only humanitarian, but also with the longer term livelihood. It means development and also the peace building. Because you can imagine it's about the nature here is whenever we try to intervene, we have to take into account all these three main drivers, and cash and voucher assistance can be considered one of the most effective ways whenever and wherever possible. Of course, how to ensure that the most vulnerable people, especially children, women, and disability people, can be included. Yes. Yes, and I just want to come up a little bit at a lesson learned, because anticipatory action as well, or forecast-based financing is something maybe new in some country or some area. And in order to enable this to practice into the field, so we consider three most important things. The first one is about the policy level, because when we talk about the terminology, policy, anticipatory action or forecast-based financing, some people, they are totally new and they have no idea what is it, but actually that is some kind of thing, we do something before things happen. So the first one is the policy should be available, or I mean that's the different actors, they have should reasonable understanding about what does it mean with anticipatory action. And at the same time, the financing mechanism should be embedded into the existing, like disaster risk management or even development, socio-economic development planning process, and building resilient. Yes, and the second thing is about the engaging with different actors and at different level, so that the anticipatory action can be built into the different perspective. Yes, and the last but not the least is in the long run about the linkage between the anticipatory action with, from disaster risk management to social protection. Because up to the end of this eco-funded project, and we also try to engage with as an actor at ministry level, and we feel very encouraging, because some ministry, like Ministry of Social Affairs in Vietnam, we call MOLISA, now they have also talked a lot about how to link anticipatory action with social protection. And I think that's to reach to the nexus among humanitarian development and peace building, it cannot come up, we cannot reach after one night, but it is a long process to build and to engage and to it was as a different people, different actors, they have different. And I would like to update some good things, especially from the ASEAN perspective, because some months ago, ASEAN Association of Southeast Asia country, we have already adopted we call it the ASEAN framework on anticipatory action in disaster risk management. I think it's just very key milestone, because through that we can use this as a blueprint for different actors to continue as an effort. So that's my quick sharing from community engagement and the Nexus of cash and voucher assistance and yes, and the disaster risk reduction. So thank you very much for the listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dong. Thank you. So we've come now a long way. We've gone to the community level. We've heard about the importance of policy and actual coordination between different line ministries to make sure also there is a transition between anticipatory action and humanitarian cash assistance and social protection. We will now have an additional perspective that is very critical, emerging from many contexts. And so I think even what we hear about Vietnam, look at your own context that you work with or the different regions you work with and see how is your experience in these contexts according to this topic. So I would like to hand over to Ms. Ha from CARE International Vietnam, who will share with us hopefully a bit more what can we do when crisis shock is happening and already affecting vulnerable communities. In particular, we know that girls and women are often the most vulnerable in very disaster-prone areas. Why or how do you think this challenge can be overcome, and what have you learned? What are the learnings from this project and your own perspective on the issue of GC, right? Gender and inclusion, social inclusion, that this project has started to tackle, but what else can be done? Over to you, Ms. Ha. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So good morning, everyone. I would like to talk a little bit more from the perspective, like from the experience from the project, but focusing on the aspect of GESI, gender equality and social inclusion. Why GESI or in gender equality integration into anticipatory actions are still remaining like a challenge, and how we as a consortium experienced different solutions to overcome those challenges when working with the local community. We know the challenges, like the very first challenges that we face first is about the policy and regulations. Even though there is a regulations on mainstreaming gender in the CBDRM in Vietnam, the community-based disaster risk management, but there's no such very detailed guidance on how to really implement it in reality. And the implementation at the low quality is actually very limited because of the scarce resources. And very often that there is not enough budget allocated for such activity, even though there is already embedded in the guidance from the government. The second point is the lack of understanding and hands-on experience from the people within the system. So it's very common for us whenever we work with the people that sometimes people just think is a common belief that women are the homogeneous group of people and gender is already met when there is maybe just one representative, one woman from the local women's union attending the meeting, and that means like all the voices of the women in the whole communities are really well heard. So it's very common. And the third one is most also from the gender person like me, what we have been doing is the most challenging one, and it takes really a long time, is about the social norms. Well, you know, this project has been conducted in the 4 poorest communes in all of them are in the mountainous area with a 90 or 100% of people are ethnic minority. And the poverty rate and illiteracy rate is super, super high. And mostly the women are the illiterate one. So they are often perceived as the one who are uneducated, and they are weak, and they are often excluded from the effective participation and decision making in the whole process in the DRR activities. So I would like to share some of the experience and lessons learned when we had the chance to work with the community. So like very first one, we always try to seek and also to promote the effective engagement of the most vulnerable groups in the society, in the communities, like whether like different genders, different ages, or different abilities. So from the very first stage, we had like the different impact and needs assessment to identify what are the different needs, like how the disaster impacted them in the different groups differently. And like a list of anticipatory actions were developed and then also validated back again with the community members, including women and men, to really see, okay, so those are the items, the activities, or the actions that they definitely answer to the specific needs, mostly of especially the most vulnerable groups in the society, in the community. And I also want to stress out the importance of the cash disbursement. Even though during the time of the project, within the last 18 months, there was no trigger. But then a simulation happened. And like throughout the cash disbursement, like the list we created together with the community, the list of like all the criteria for the beneficiary selection, and it was like transparently, publicly displayed in the communal house, so everybody in the community understand why there are certain criteria for selection. So it's very transparent. So in that list, of course, like there are different criteria of the selection, like the people who are the most prone to the disaster areas, like the people, like the women, the female-headed household, or the women with pregnancy, or the people with disabilities. So those are like also including the different marks. So like for selecting the beneficiaries. And when the cash was dispersed, like we work with the post office to deliver the cash to the selected beneficiaries, also thinking of how it can be best benefit to them, or like accommodate them to receive the cash in the most convenient way. And like the analysis, the evaluation of the post cash disbursement was quite impressive, with like more than 93% of the people in the beneficiary group share the satisfaction and like in the value of the cash when they receive it. And like more than 75% of the receivers, the recipients mentioned that both men and women in the family made joy decision when they buy things, the item as agreed and like before. And there was no GBV case like recorded. So it was quite impressive for us. The next one, due to the limited time limitation, I cannot really go very detailed in all activities that we have done. But for us in this project, we don't see the women or the girls or the vulnerable groups are really like the passive recipients. And we saw them like the active change agents. So we always encouraging them, creating space for them to jointly lead some certain parts, for example, in the community event for communication, or like they also, like the women and girls are were encouraged to share, they join the discussion in the community. They draw out also the exact evacuation exit in the community, because they know the best where to go first when things happen. And they were also encouraged to share that map with the local leaders. And so these are some of the very examples that I would like to share. And also at the ASEAN level, we have the JESI training module that was already endorsed by the ASEAN Secretary. And now we are waiting for the ASEAN Committee for Disaster Management Chairman to have his site. And thanks to the great effort from the consortium regional team. Last remark from my sharing today is, well, 18 months is relatively short to really make any viable change. And when you're talking about gender equality, you're talking about social inclusion, long-term intervention is really required, especially when you work on changing the social norms or the livelihood. It cannot do overnight. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So this has been a very interesting sneak preview on what we need to look at when we're looking at anticipatory action. It sounds very easy to say, oh, we will disperse when we have met this trigger threshold, and then we do the cash. It is not just this, it is more than that. Before we go to some closing remarks, I wanted to ask any one of you whether you have any comments to share or any experiences that maybe relate to Vietnam or beyond the ASEAN region even, because we see that in many contexts, many organizations and governments are more and more increasingly trying to utilize the tool of cash transfers in anticipatory action to help buffer any impending shock. We know, for example, in East Africa, the hunger safety net interventions in Kenya, in the Horn of Africa, many years ago already started to disperse transfers to likely affected, drought-affected communities before the large-scale onset of the drought impact. And we have seen this time around, unfortunately, that this has not been so effective. You can ask questions why and what, but we do think that one of the pointers we've just heard from Ms. Ha is possibly the inclusion of community engagement to also hold governments accountable to ensure that policy is implemented, that programs are implemented timely, and that there is an ongoing dialogue and collaboration. But let me just stop here and we'll give you some microphones. If there's anyone who has a question or a comment, sorry, please go ahead. Yes.
Hello, my name is Azmat Khan and I'm working with Foundation for Rural Development, FRD in Pakistan. Just a comment because we do have a conditional cash grant program in Pakistan where we are sort of helping the communities build their resilience with the climate change. But we had very interesting discussions on the gender mainstreaming and all these things. So we were in field and we were talking to some women and I asked the women, has it made any change in your life? And the cash modality, specifically in that area where we are sort of reviving the carpet weaving industry, where the women are being trained on how to weave the carpets and we do provide them cash. And one woman told in a very interesting manner that previously, our men used to come and tell us that I have sold the cow to X or Y or Z from that village, so that person will come and just hand over the cow to them. But now, when they plan to sell the cow, they discuss it with us and they take our consent whether we should sell the cow or do we need it. So these are the small changes which we do bring in. Like sometimes we feel that we are just fulfilling the practical gender needs of the women, but in fact we do contribute to the strategic gender needs of the women. So thank you so much for presenting this.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very, very important point. Incremental change, right? It doesn't happen overnight. We had one more question or comment over there. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Irene. I work for Danish NGO, Missionist. I am working in Afghanistan, and we implement different cash intervention there. So my question would be on the sustainability side and on the link between cash distribution and the Nexus. So the question would be how we can ensure sustainability. There is a specific cash modality that it's better to implement in order to be sustainable in the long term. We do know that there are different modalities. We can use a voucher, but we can also use cash in unconditional restricted, unrestricted modality. So what we find out challenging is exactly to ensure the sustainability in the long term of a cash distribution and make sure that the cash will be not one shot for the communities and there is an outstanding programming that can ensure a sustainable way out and not create kind of dependency on the cash distribution. So that will be my question for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any particular panelists to answer?
I have no one particular, the ones who feel more comfortable with.
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting and important question. Sustainability. Everything, not only with cash intervention, but also with in-kind intervention, we are also trying to tap about the sustainability. But from our own experience and what I have observed so far, sustainability can be ensured as long as the basic need have been met. So I think that's for the very basic, once the basic needs have been met. So at the same time, you have to take into account about the long-term livelihood opportunity. So that's the only way to create a sustainability for the community instead of dependency. Yeah, thank you.
No, I just quickly share. Yeah, so just echoing what my colleague just mentioned. I mean, like for example, for our project in the same area, it's not like only for the anticipatory action project going on, but for example, like we have in some certain community, like there also the village and saving loan association. So it's another way. It's always going together, the short term and also the long term activity together. So hope it helps. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure you can, after the session, have a quick bilateral to dive deeper. Thank you so much. We're a bit pressed with time. I would like to ask, actually, Mr. Massimo Della Rosa to conclude with some points from DG ECHO that has actually funded this project intervention, as I said before. What is very critical, we see this is not a one-time short-term intervention. It has to continue. So we will have obviously some questions around sustainability, who picks up what, where, and what can a donor and also a very active lead agency in the Donor Cash Forum, for example, give as guidance and recommendations even across donor peer agencies and to governments and to actors that are on the ground, civil society. So over to you. Thank you so much, Massimo.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. And thanks to the colleagues from Vietnam for the presentation. I would like to spend a few words on the title of this presentation. I think the learning from Vietnam is extremely important if we want to link the concept of anticipatory action, cash, and social protection. If we take it separately, I think most of us, we were already doing for several years. And we are learning by doing in many countries, not only Vietnam, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America. Everywhere, this concept has been applied separately often by different group of specialists. When we talk about the operationalization of the Nexus, we are learning that more and more often we needed to have an holistic approach. And as a DG ECHO, for instance, in these days, some of you saw yesterday, we have, for instance, a new policy on localization, that it was a very important element in which I think we have to invest even more. The policy on cash that was released last year and the policy on disaster preparedness are all fitting the discussion that we're having here today. Let me do a step back. Anticipatory action, it's very important, as we know and what we heard, linking in particular to disaster, those that are predictable best with data and digitalizations, we could learn often before the disaster happened. And if we can better prepare, it could be extremely important. But anticipatory action, as we learn, it's also important as an early response. And the system, it works even better if the anticipatory action is linked to a system that already exists in that given country. And that's why social protection is the link that often was missing in the past, because in the structure of government, often disaster preparedness and social protection are dealt by separate ministries. And the linkages, the famous single registry, the interoperabilities of the system, even with a goodwill, not always is still possible in many countries where most of us are working. So the logic is to understand where the gaps are and how we could better invest. And at this purpose, as I said, I think if we keep separated the concept, we are already advancing quite well. What I think we are discussing often among donors with partners and more often with government, because as you said, anticipatory action is a concept now as part of policy and priorities from many governments around the world. Climate change, unfortunately, is waking up many people. At this purpose, the operationalization of the Nexus, another time I don't want to sound too simplistic, but it's the key aspect in which we can bring together the humanitarian. We discuss a lot about cash, but cash alone, and especially if it's funded by the humanitarian donor, is not the solution and probably is not sustainable. Cash could be better sustainable when it's linked to longer-term investment by government if they have the means, or by development donors that are already working on different aspects. That's why the other word that we are learning to use more and more often is what we call shock-responsive social protection. And in the title, help to understand better how this anticipatory action is linked to a better response to shocks. And shocks, as we learned today, could be related to natural disasters, but there are many other shocks in which in the past few years we are learning to mobilize quickly resources, as for the pandemics, unfortunately, and more often, even if it's more difficult, for conflict-related activities. Just to conclude, a few challenges and maybe a couple of opportunities. As I say, the localization is extremely important. I would like to underline the concept that localization is enhancing support to local actors, community, but it's also related to enhancing national actors. And national actors, as we heard today, it means also government-led systems that are already dealing to better be prepared for a crisis. And the data, I would say, is we're learning fast by digitalization to quickly collect data before the crisis happens in order to be quick to respond. However, as we know, there are still gaps in which not always ministries share the same database. And this is, unfortunately, something that we need to do better. In terms of opportunities, I would just close with 3 words. The concept seems smart. Everybody probably agreed that what we are hearing today is extremely important. It's efficient, and all the work done with cash shows that often is one of the best options to deliver. And on the other hand, is it feasible? Is it feasible, especially if we link the humanitarian programs that are often piloting something new or are extremely important to save lives at the beginning with other sources of financing, as development and government as well. And only if we move on the 3 smart, efficiency and feasibility, we could probably plan better together how strategically the different partnership could enhance also innovative financing. That is the other key word of this humanitarian forum today, because often we are discussing about financial gaps. And probably financial gaps, it continue to be there if we are just trying to get more funding only from the humanitarian donors for humanitarian needs. But when we're reacting to disasters, we are using also emergency toolbox. And in emergency toolbox, development donors could complement as well, as for the government budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That is a very good summary of what needs to be done. Thank you, Massimo. So as we've heard, there is a lot of very good initiatives. And what we see when we talk Nexus, which has become the buzzword of the last years, Nexus just really means connecting the different tools we have in different toolboxes together to have more impact in advance, during and after disaster shocks happen. So I just want to read out a statistic many of you know as we're closing. 27 of 35 countries most affected by climate change are experiencing right now extreme food insecurity. You all know you work in this field. By 2050, an additional 8 to 80 million people could face hunger, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Central America. We know we have more crises, we have more funding needs, but we are not yet bringing all the instruments together to act, and not all the stakeholders. This is a call to action for all of us in whatever function we work, to see that bringing this together is not easy. It takes more time than 18 months of a humanitarian project, but it can be very impactful if we're patient and we take a no regrets approach. So thank you so much to my wonderful distinguished panelists, the Dutch government, Ms. Schrooman, who had to rush for another commitment, unfortunately, Mr. Dong, Mr. Trong from IMHEN online, thank you so much for being with us, and also Ms. Ha and Mr. La Rosa. And I want to also thank very much DG ECHO for facilitating this opportunity, not only for this project, but for this session, as as well as the collaborative cash delivery network that has brought together different NGO actors to actually look at social protection linkages and anticipatory action. So thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you take some action points away from this for yourself. Thank you.